In this video, I'm going to share a real-life negotiation I was involved in a very short time ago. And it's a negotiation that was going on between two parties, obviously. It was a manufacturer of lids for boxes, different kind of boxes, and a buyer. And those two parties had been working together for several years. And what happened in this case was that the two parties met for renewal of the annual contract. And the value of the annual contract was approximately 25 million. And the buyer opened up this negotiation by saying, do you know what, my dear supplier, we want a reduction of 9%, which obviously would be equal to approximately 2.25 million. Now, in this case, the supplier actually said, but you know what, we don't have the opportunity to reduce the price. It's not an option. Even though we really value you as an important customer, we can't reduce the price. We can't give you a discount because it will just hurt us on our bottom line. Now, just to stop my story for a second, if the supplier in this case actually reduced the price, we are in a zero-sum game, obviously, because the buyer would win at the expense of the supplier. The buyer would get a reduction of 9%, but the supplier would pay for those 9%. Now, on the other hand, if the supplier in this case just are steady and firm on not reducing the price, and the buyer actually need that reduction for whatever reason, we're still in a zero-sum game because now the supplier is winning at the expense of the buyer. But what these two parties actually managed to agree on is actually try to move from this opening of a zero-sum game and go into SMARTnership. And how do we do that? Well, we have to start to look at a number of variables beside the price issue. So they actually started to do an analysis of everything that could be negotiated. And one thing they could identify was that the current situation was that the supplier were actually delivering to 16 different locations, and they were doing delivery every second week. Another thing they could obviously identify was that the supplier was responsible for the warehousing. They could also identify that terms of payment currently in the existing agreement was 65 days. So that was the current terms of payment from the supplier. And they also were able to identify that at the existing agreement, there was a 3-year warranty. The lid size could be a variable that could be negotiated as well. And then currently was just in time production. That means that the customer was sending off the order, and then the supplier had to manufacture based on that order, and there was not a long-term forecast on what should be actually produced and supplied. Now, the key thing when we move from zero-sum into SMARTnership is that we need to identify the cost and the value to each of these variables. So these two parties now sat down with their own team of controllers and went through these variables, these 6 variables, to identify where we got cost and value allocated in order to identify NegoEconomics. And what they could actually identify in this case was that the lid size, changing that would have a huge impact because the supplier would save and it would have a cost to the buyer. I'm getting back to the numbers in a second. Now, they would also change just in time, and by changing just in time to a planned bulk delivery, again, the supplier would save a huge amount of money, but it would cost something for the buyer. The warranty could be changed from a 3-year period into a 1-year period, and again, that would generate a benefit for the supplier at a cost of the buyer. And they could also change the warehousing, so that means instead of the supplier kept everything in stock, it would actually be a better mutual solution if the buyer put it in their stock. We could also change the delivery to 16 locations into 1 instead and reduce the amount of deliveries from twice a month to once a month. That will utilize the potential value as well. And terms of payment was changed from 65 days into cash. And the reason for that was obviously the cost of money, the interest rate in the 2 different organizations. And by utilizing those variables, they could actually mutually identify a value of 4.198 million. Now, the big question is, that amount of money just generated is free money. That is a generated amount of money that doesn't cost either of the side anything because the costs have actually been taken out already. And just to show you in this case, we have the variables out here to the left, and you can see delivery was 16 locations, and that was changed from 16 locations to 1. What we see is that that generates a benefit for the supplier at 580,000. It had a cost for the customer of 140. So the mutual room for negotiation is obviously the 440,000 we got out here. Delivery once a month instead of twice a month would generate a benefit for the supplier 260. It would cost the customer 80, and the mutual benefit, obviously the difference between the two numbers in this case, would be 180. The warehousing, moving that from the supplier to the buyer, would generate a profit to the supplier of 618. It would cost the customer 160. So the mutual value, obviously the difference we got in here is 458. Changing the warranty period from 3 to 1 year would generate a benefit to the supplier of 310, cost the customer 125, mutual value 185, and the interest rate that was shared between the two parties showed that the supplier had a cost of money of 7, the customer had a cost of 3, so the mutual value was obviously 4, and if we capitalize that into the total value of the project, that would be 890,000. Changing just in time into bulk orders generated a benefit of 675, costed the customer 210, so the difference is 465. And the last one was changing the lid size. So by changing the lid size, the supplier would actually generate a benefit of 2.4 million. It would cost the customer 820,000 in chain setup and packaging. So the mutual value here was actually 1.58. So that's how we are generating the total value of 4,198,000. Now, as you recalled, what the parties actually wanted, or what the buyer wanted, was actually to generate a reduction, as you can see here, of 9%, the 2.250. Now we have generated 4.198, so that is way above what was actually requested. So we are able to split that, and the actual negotiation in SMARTnership is now all about how we're going to split that value down here. So the focus in SMARTnership moves from discussing in the zero-sum game who's winning at the expense of who into how can we identify mutual value that we call NegoEconomics and how we're going to split that value. If I'm going to be rude just for a second, if you negotiate in zero-sum, you're really back to the Stone Age where we're just working with a box. And then somebody invented the wheel. And obviously, as you can see, it's so much easier moving the wheel than just moving this box. So try and change your mindset from traditional, old school zero-sum into how we can conduct SMARTnership.